program in the Ministry of Education.
Government has an obligation to protect its citizens and their investment. You have your house, your car, and your education, three major investments. Now, when an institution or a business goes and registers itself as a university, with no clear standards or so on, it's a name. And persons go and they invest, sometimes massive sums of money, in the hope of being given a degree or an award of some value. And it turns out that, after years and expenditure, you have something that isn't portable, has no real value. And so, because of that, regulation is important. We know you can't just buy a car and drive it. There's a process by which you're made entitled to drive on our roads. And so it's the same thing. Regulation is important to protect standards and to protect quality and ultimately to protect people.
Regulation, registration and development. These are the watchwords that define J-TEC's reason for being. Add inclusiveness as another key driver, and one will understand why Mrs. Henry Wilson is so passionate about the development of the tertiary sector and how she would like stakeholders to see the value of J-TEC to the education and learning process.
I'd like them to see it as a dynamic entity that is committed to ensuring that our institutions observe the global standards. I don't want to say minimal standards because that's not where we're going, right? I'd like them to see as a place where they can come and really have a conversation with us about how they enhance what they're doing, that we would be able to present whatever we're doing from an informed point of view, using data to inform what we're doing, so that our policies are not just based on notions, but that they actually provide some kind of a guidance as to where they should go. And in the end, I'd love us to have a whole retinue of institutions, I don't know the number, I don't know, that really are able to embrace people of different quality. In other words, we don't just want the high achievers, we want everybody to know that tertiary education has a place for them. So we need to be as inclusionary as possible, because, back to my little old mantra, every child can learn, every child must. Every adult has the capacity for higher level development, not necessarily in the same way or on the same day, as they say, but that they have that capacity. How do we give them that opportunity?
What J-TEC is expected to do, and what we are in fact trying to do, is to ensure that all these inputs are mobilized so that Jamaica will have a diversified tertiary education sector. It will include the public universities, it will include private universities, it will include colleges, specialized colleges in some cases, and importantly, it will include the private institutions and overseas institutions functioning in Jamaica.
The Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission, J-TEC, charting new pathways for Jamaica's tertiary education sector. At this point, we could just end the meeting because you have gotten so much information, I think, out of that documentary. But you have to hear from Mrs. Henry Wilson because that's just a tape. You have her live and direct here this morning. And she's going to go behind the curtains a little bit with a special presentation on the national qualifications in a wider context. So please help me welcome Mrs. Henry Wilson.
Members of the Consular Corps, other representatives of our international partners, Professor Hall, our chairman, and all who have accepted our invitation to join us for a working breakfast. You didn't know you were going to do so much hearing, right? So much listening. So I'll try to make this as pointed and as focused as possible to allow for some questions from our guests this morning. Much of what, in terms of introduction, you have already heard and seen. And as was said by Professor Hall, J-TEC is one of the entities that emanated from the Education System Transformation Program. And it came out of several iterations of analyses, studies, all of which concluded that you needed to have a proper framework for tertiary education, primarily as it is growing and has grown exponentially, and also because it is an internationally traded service as defined by GATS, the General Agreement of Trade and Services under the World Trade Organization. We actually started the work of setting up the entity perhaps late 2011. I actually came on board 2012. And we have legislation at the CPC. I see our legal consultant here. We have been trying desperately through all kinds of means, if anybody here has any influence, to get them to return the draft to us so that the legislative process can commence. But in the interim, given the urgency and the developments in the sector, the minister went to the cabinet of the country, our Minister of Education, and required of them, or requested of them, which was granted, the authority for the Jamaica Tertiary Education Commission to begin the process of registration of entities. Depending on whom you speak with, there are different figures about how many tertiary entities are in Jamaica. We really do not know. In the case of the University Council of Jamaica, institutions only register if they want to be accredited externally. There's nothing that compels them to register. And so an institution can operate for many, many years. In fact, when we did our launch, there was one institution that told us that they have been operating for 50 years, but it was the first most people were hearing about it. So there are many institutions that are operating that we don't know about. When there is a problem, someone will come and say, well, you know, I have been attending this institution, I can't get my certificate, or having gotten my certificate, they're telling me that there's no value on it, that the programs are not properly quality assured, and at that point in time, we know about the entity. So at the point of entry, J-TEC is supposed to register all institutions, so it will become mandatory. If an institution is registered and does not meet the standards, then it can be closed down according to our legislation. So we will have teeth, which we won't use, which we will use judiciously. But a part of the registration process is to get institutions up to speed. As has been said many times this morning, our mandate is to create a standards-based, quality-driven tertiary education system. And these are the three legs of our mandate. And we emphasize a lot the developmental side of our mandate, because we believe it is important for us not just to have sanctions, but to also to provide support. And so we emphasize the development aspect. In looking at the development of the tertiary sector, of course, because of its global nature, we have to take into account what we call the global ecosystem. What is the context within which we operate? And what are some of the factors, some of the issues that drive that sector? And very quickly, I just want to review 5 of the issues, 5 of the themes, 5 of the sort of catalysts that relate to our considerations and our actions. And the 5 are what is called massification, concept and reality of it. It's a strange word. I don't know what the Spanish or the Russian equivalent or the Chinese equivalent is, but I'll try to explain it. What globalization and its impact on tertiary education. Why we are committed to what we call differentiation of institutions on the tertiary landscape. The critical component of quality assurance and accountability, inevitable demands of the tertiary sector. And a very tricky one, which I'll refer to, and all of us have this issue before us. How do we finance all of this? Do we finance it, or do the students finance it? So in terms of massification, this concept has emerged as a result of the numbers of persons, the exponential growth in the numbers of persons who want to benefit from tertiary education. And as we said in the video, it should not be exclusionary. We should try and find a way to embrace all those who have that as one of their objectives, personal objectives. How do they benefit from tertiary? But the numbers have been increasing exponentially. According to UNESCO, in the year 2000, about 19% of the eligible cohort, 19% of the global eligible cohort actually had access to tertiary education. That grew to 26% in 2007. Unfortunately, in terms of developing countries, it did not grow as fast as in the case of developed countries. And that's a gap that you will always see, and why in our context we are so determined that we have to put this on the front burner and to try and improve both access and affordability. In our case in Jamaica, our 2030 vision says that we should have a minimum of 30% of our population benefiting from tertiary education. Depending again on how you count it, some people say we have arrived at, and perhaps we have surpassed that target. But the fact of the matter is that of concern is that the figures coming out of the Planning Institute of Jamaica indicate that there has been a decline in the numbers and a decline in access over the last 5 years. That's something that concerns us very, very much. So we seem to have moved in the right direction, and for whatever reason, there's a reversal. And I've asked our colleagues at PIOJ to just interrogate those numbers a little bit more to give us a better idea as to what has happened. We can guess, but we want to actually get the statistics. So in terms of the challenge that we have, given the numbers that want access to tertiary, quality assurance becomes an imperative. And registration, as we have said, is the first step. But registration is a rigorous process. And we have actually started the pilot of the registration process. And we are learning a lot about the requirements of these institutions in order for them to really meet the globally determined standards, which is where we are consistently going. All right? There is no doubt about it. J-TEC is not acting as a barrier because we recognize that the profile of the tertiary student has changed. More mature persons, lots of women, lots of part-timers. That is the profile that we have to work with. So the institutions themselves now need to put in place the kinds of programs that can facilitate that change in profile. When some of us went to university, we had no care in the world. We went, our parents dropped us at school. We spent the entire day there, did very little work sometimes, but that is, well, I think a lot of them still do very little work, but the student population, the profile has now changed. And there are lots of persons who are using their prior learning as a part of advancing in terms of the new market demands. How do our institutions rise to that challenge? Affordability is an issue, and I'll come back to that. And how do we try to provide, and whose role is it to provide? Can institutions actually forgive a lot of the debt that they now have, or will they have to pursue their receivables? What is the implications in terms of things like deregistration of students? So these are some of the issues as we speak about access and affordability. The other thing that we talk about when we talk about massification, which is implied by much of what I've said, is that we now have on the landscape what could have been considered traditional academic institutions, research-driven academic institutions, but we are also seeing the emergence of more specialized institutions. So the Caribbean Maritime Institute has been around for a while, but the demand now is greater as the economy, there are changes in our economy. You also have medical institutions, but many of them offering specialist services. So there are more specialists, there's a niche there for more specialist institutions as there is an increase in the number of persons. The other theme that drives us a lot is the globalization, the issue of globalization. We can't opt out of it, so we have to find a way, not just to cope with it, but to create and innovate, given what are some of the opportunities, and to be very aware of what would be some of the threats. Those of you who are here from Europe, you know about the Bologna process, where as a part of the need for us to benchmark against the best, in Europe, 40 countries have come together and they have that framework, the Bologna framework. I'll come to how we see ourselves as fitting into that process, because we want to ensure that when our students receive their certification, that it is as valid here as it is there. So I'll come back to that in a minute. The other thing, of course, is that places like UNESCO, they're driving the recognition, the cross-border recognition. That was a major theme at the UNESCO conference in Paris earlier last month, end of last month. And some of our Latin American colleagues here should have been a part of that discussion, where we're talking about how Latin America and the Caribbean can develop instruments for cross-border recognition, so that the value of a degree here could be made equivalent to some other award in your system. We are very much involved in that discussion, and we want to be a part of that convention to give our people more opportunities, and also to ensure that we are actually equivalent to the very best. In terms of differentiation of institutions, we have just completed 2 studies. One for the teachers' colleges, the status of the teachers' colleges, and another for the community colleges. And I think it's very interesting what is revealed there, where you really have different kinds of publics who are accessing these types of institutions versus those who are accessing universities, etc. What we are committed to is that, A, there should be a process of articulation across the system, where you can move from one college into a higher level institution, and that you do not lose any of the credits or whatever it is you have earned at the previous level. So people can bank credits. They can also decide that they want to do a set of subjects in one institution and also benefit from other institutions. You may be familiar or not with what has emerged as a part of massification facilitated by ICT, the whole concept of Moocs, massive online courses. And this was pioneered actually by some of the most reputable, high-status institutions in the world, the Harvards and the Princetons. About 120-something institutions are now on that platform. And what Moocs, what it allows for is that you can go online and pursue a course that is being taught at Princeton or being taught at Stanford, who actually, they were one of the pioneers of the entire effort. We have been talking with institutions about how do you integrate a course that somebody may learn on a Moocs with a local credential, so that I could go on and do something on higher education in Europe, access through ICT, full platform, and then they could give me credits for it, having done the quality assurance, right? And that could be considered as a part of my program. What it does is give students more options, both in terms of access to courses, but also in terms of access to different types of teaching and learning. And we have been talking to the institutions about how they can use